Hello, it is Jessica Weaver, and I'm here with Laura Nakachi, an estate attorney. I am a financial advisor, author, and blogger. And guess what? It is, Lauren see this before, it's champagne time! It is one of our wine and wealth episodes, and I am so excited to talk about estate planning. Not necessarily as people's death and passing on, but it's such a critical time to be thinking about this right now with the coronavirus shutdowns, people having to say goodbye to loved ones without actually being there with them. And it's definitely making people think about legacy planning, estate planning, power of attorneys, all that good stuff. So thank you, Lauren. Cheers to you. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming on today. We'll take a quick sip.
Yes, I think you have to after you cheers.
Yes, exactly. And I think everybody has been dipping into their wine more and more. So this is
Yep,
pretty good timing.
absolutely. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you, Lauren. Lauren spoke at one of our Strong Retirement Club events. She was fantastic, and I knew I had to bring her to our Wine and Wealth to get her message out there because it is so important, isn't it, Lauren, to have
It
your
really
estate in
is.
order?
And I think people are seeing how important it is to have a plan now, both as we were speaking about financially and an estate plan. This is a good time to do it because most people have a little bit more time, but it also reinforces the idea that you don't want to wait until the last minute. You want to make sure that you're comfortable no matter what is going on in your life. Good things, bad things, you want this plan in place.
Why do you think it's so hard for couples to make that step in getting the estate document set up? Is there a common argument that they have?
It's not so much an argument as I think it is a combination of when you do your estate plan, you're really addressing your own mortality. And I think that is difficult for people to think about. And that's understandable. Something that's more at the surface, I think that's sort of underlying that people don't always recognize. Something more at the surface is who is going to take care of our minor children. That discussion puts off more estate plans than anything else when it comes to couples.
Mm-hmm. Now, who has an estate? Does a college student, does she have an estate?
So anyone with any money has an estate, and it could be your checking account. You have an estate. And the estate planning is really a three document is the basic estate planning. And so especially for a college student, in those documents is something called a power of attorney and a healthcare proxy. And you don't need any money for those, but you should definitely have them. It's the healthcare proxy comes into effect if something happens to you and you can't communicate your healthcare wishes. This is a document that allows someone else to do that on your behalf. Just because you still live with your parent, if you're 18 or over, doesn't mean that they get access to your medical records or that they can make those decisions for you.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, adults in the working world should have these as well, not just college students. And the power of attorney is a similar document, but it allows someone to make legal and financial decisions on your behalf if you can't do so yourself.
Okay, that's what I figured, but you're in college, you're not thinking about these things.
No, so I
That's
try to get the parents.
the
Mhm.
parent makes that nudge. Once your kid goes across state lines to a different state, you should find out how to get that state's power of attorney language set up so that if there is, I went to the hospital when I was in college, right? My
Mhm.
parents were just so scared. Luckily,
Mhm.
my brother was with me and he was able to kind of relay the message, the information going on. But that's really scary for your kids to be out of the nest. You get a call from an emergency room and you can't find out too much information.
Right,
You know
exactly.
that.
Mhm.
Now, you mentioned the guardians for the kids being a tough thing to agree on, which I could
Mhm.
see. There's too many good options, maybe there's no good options. But I also see it fast forward to that couple's now in retirement. I see them arguing over how much money they want to leave their kids.
Mhm.
Do they
And
want to
how much
leave them all
control
of
they
it?
want to have. Mhm.
Yeah. Do they want to spend all their money or do they want to gift their inheritance to their children? And a lot of times a couple isn't on the same page with that.
Yes, I see that as well. And I see couples differing on how much control they want their kids to have over the money that they're inheriting. Some couples or one person out of the couple thinks they're going to be old enough, they can make their own mistakes or their own good decisions, and sometimes the other parent thinks, well, why don't we just try to protect it? So that is the conversation when people are getting older.
Yeah, how much to leave them,
Yes.
how to leave it to them. Like you said, how much control do you want the kids to have? And it might be different for each child too.
Right, which is a whole nother discussion. But we do have clients that disagree. They have a favorite charity. They want a certain percentage going to that charity.
Mhm.
Whereas the other parent says, well, why don't we let the kids give it to the charity? So it's a lot of discussions around that. And as advisors, we can only give so much advice. At some point, the client does need to, get on the same page to
To
do the
make a decision.
plan.
Yeah, you can tell them what you've seen work, not work. Give them options, give them ideas, because there's so many ways to leave your assets to children, charities, loved ones, and
Mhm.
stuff. So getting educated is definitely the first step you need to make. You can't, I would say, is it harder if a couple comes in and they know exactly what they want to do versus a couple who's indecisive?
Not necessarily. Some
No.
couples that know exactly what they want, once we talk about it, there are a lot of nuances. I'm sure when you have people come to you and say, this is exactly how I want my money to be handled. And then once you sort of walk through it with them, other little light bulbs start going off and they start thinking of other options. So I find both very interesting. To work with, because some people that know exactly what they want end up doing something a little bit different after we talk. And people that are indecisive, I feel that they know more than they think they do about what they want. They just haven't really articulated it. So it hasn't been, they're thinking in their mind, this is overwhelming. I don't know what I want. But once you start talking to them, they do really have an idea.
Yeah, they don't know how to put it to words or
And
in legal terms. What has been a common costly mistake when it comes to estate planning?
okay, so the steps of estate planning are, while you're alive, we draft your wills, if maybe a trust, those healthcare proxies, the powers of attorney. The mistakes really come to light after the first spouse passes away, or if a single person passes away upon their passing. Um, because that's really when you figure out, when you see the tax consequences of what the planning is. You see if they've left a beneficiary in an old document that they really didn't want to leave money to anymore. So I would say the costliest part is when documents are done and then not revised for decades because tax laws change. So you could make a pretty big mistake if you don't revisit your estate plan at least every 5 to 7 years. Because there could be some pretty big estate tax consequences. And for things like when the exemption is high, so right now you can pass on over $11 million of your wealth
A lot
per
of money.
person without estate taxes. So most of us are not going to fall in that category. When the exemption goes down, there could be a clause in your will that will put all of your money in a trust that doesn't just benefit your spouse because it was taking advantage of some high exemptions. Um, so it would be for your spouse and your children rather than just your spouse first. So
Okay.
it's not the end of the world, but it's not ideal for most families. They want their spouse to get everything first.
Yeah, can you fix those things after a,
Mm-hmm.
a
So,
death has already happened?
well, after the death has happened, you do have to follow the terms of the will.
Yeah.
So you really are in a little bit of a pickle if you haven't updated those documents.
Mm-hmm.
There's things we can do on the back end so that there are not as many adverse estate tax consequences for the surviving spouse. So we can modify a trust under a will, things like that. But once that person passes away, it's a tough job to fix it. We try. Yeah.
And what has been a big regret that you've seen people make with their estate plans? And maybe it's a personal one, not explaining why they disinherited a child or gave one child more than the other. Have you seen, regrets or people verbalizing regrets, or just see the aftermath maybe of families broken up because I don't know a family that hasn't been affected by death and money, and
Yes.
relationships affected by death and money.
So I think for a situation where you have a surviving spouse or even the children at that point are inheriting, I think it's the regret is not being more open about their plan. It causes a lot of, it can potentially cause a lot of legal fees if you haven't explained to your children your plans. They'll challenge the will. The other thing is sort of touching on what we were just talking about is that the plan had never been updated. So there are some outdated gifts to people, caretakers that are no longer in your life, or trusts that are set up that are really not tax efficient anymore. Those are the sort of regrets I see once someone's passed away. Um, it's not so much a regret, but it's similar that people who are coming to me to do estate plans, a lot of the feedback is, I can't believe I waited so long. And they wish that they had done it sooner. Now, thankfully, I'm getting to them. We're doing their plans. We're making it all right. But they think that it's a big undertaking when in fact, I do the work. I help you and then I do the work. All you have to do is have the discussions with me and you'll have that peace of mind.
You brought up two things. I was just thinking back to clients, and one, they were retirement age, their children were grown, and in their will, they had left the house to their neighbors.
Yeah.
Why did they do that? Because they named their neighbors as guardians of their children, which probably not the best way to put it in a will, to just gift your house to the neighbors to shelter your kids. You could have left it in a trust or some way better for the kids.
Mm-hmm.
But if they had passed away, their old neighbors were going to get their house. And they
Right.
had
And
no
that,
relationship with them anymore.
no. And that's really something that's going to go that way. It's hard to fix something like that.
It's hard to challenge it. And then you brought up, children challenging a will because the parents weren't able to be open about why they left things a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
And another client, he had a brother and a sister. After the father passed away, the sister said, on his deathbed, dad told me I should get everything. So right away, everybody had to get a lawyer.
Mm-hmm.
They spent, the estate went from $1 million to $200,000, just fighting over it. So everybody got less money than
Mm-hmm.
they would have. And I think that is a big thing. Parents are nervous to upset anybody while they're living, but look what happens afterwards
Yes.
by living in that fear and not being open and honest with everybody. And finding, you can find a nice way to put it, or a letter, something that you can even leave with the will, explaining your rationale behind it.
Exactly. Exactly. And it's a tough conversation. I understand why people avoid it, but like most tough conversations, it's better to have it early and take care of it. And, it ends up generally better than had you not. Um,
I was gonna say, what about with divorce? I mean, how important is it to update after a divorce or going through a divorce?
mhm.
Even.
So normally what we do is you have a will as soon as you are separated. We do a will that you're going to use until you're actually divorced. And then
Oh,
if
that's smart.
divorced, you have your full plan redone because you want to make sure, again, you might have to reappoint your guardian. You want to make sure that your money is not going to your ex-spouse. Really important there is also looking at your IRA beneficiary designation forms, your life insurance designation forms, because those kinds of assets don't pass under your will. So they actually just pass to the person that you name in those documents. So if you have your ex-spouse on there, they could inherit your IRA because among all of the other stresses and things you're going through, you forgot to update that one document. So we like to make sure that we have a sort of holistic approach when someone gets a divorce to look at all the assets and make sure everything's getting retitled as necessary.
That's a good point. And you might forget about a small IRA or a small old retirement plan, life insurance, pension, and you forget that your ex-spouse or soon to be ex-spouse is on that still.
Mm-hmm.
So kind of taking an inventory of everything. And that's a great exercise to do with an estate attorney, taking an inventory of all your assets or even an advisor and understanding, will this pass through the will or through a beneficiary designation, which trumps the will, right? It always,
Right. Yep.
that's going to go first before anything in the will is written.
Mm-hmm.
So and you can have, it really is about control.
Absolutely. And, we do an inventory for clients that are single. We do an inventory for clients that are married because, we will see an IRA form that before you had kids, maybe your brother is going to get your IRA because if both of you pass away, you usually pick a sibling or a parent. We want to make sure that if you still want your brother to get it, that's completely fine. But if you don't, we need to make sure that it's passing to the person you want to. So we really try to do an inventory with our clients and then check back with them after everything's done every 3 to 5 years. Anything new come up, any situations you want to talk about. Do you still want your brother to have your kids? Things like that. Because I know sometimes people do this, it is largely taken care of, but you do want to keep revisiting it just to make sure that nothing big changed or we don't need to accommodate any new requests.
Yeah, your children get married, your children
Mm-hmm.
have children. Like those are some big things that make you want to rethink your will. And
Mm-hmm.
it might not be your children, it could be your in-laws.
Right,
Your
exactly.
children's spouses could be the ones that you're having issues with. I know one client at his what was it, at his father's funeral, his sister-in-law went over to ask for money for her son's college tuition
Oh my
at the
stuff.
funeral. And he's like, well, it's going to be a much longer process than me just writing you a check, right? How long does usually it take to settle an estate?
A couple of years usually.
A couple of years.
That is because you need to gather all the assets and obtain date of death values. Some of those things are not difficult. We can go to an advisor and say, can you run date of death valuations? Some things take longer, businesses, real estate. And then really it's the preparation of the returns. And then the federal government and the state of New Jersey, I also practice in New York, they can take up to 18 months or longer to review and approve a return.
Long time.
Another reason why you want to have a very solid estate plan in place so that you have access to cash immediately if you need it,
Mm-hmm.
um, while all of this is going on.
I have to say, even people who have tried to settle an estate without an estate attorney, at some point they've had to hire an estate attorney. They've gotten them, and it will take them years. I know one client, it took him 3 years to get to the point where he was close to finishing, but he goes, I'm giving up. I need to hire somebody. I can't get myself past this point.
Mm-hmm.
And by then you're wasting time and energy and usually money. It's not being very efficient.
It's not, and it's
Yeah.
hard when we get those clients. It's nice that they do reach out to us and it's important, but it is hard because we have to explain to them, you now have to pay for us to review everything that you've done rather than have us on board from the beginning. We know the drill. We know how to do this 1, 2, 3. But if you've been taking all these steps, if you haven't kept an accurate ledger of expenses, things like this, we're going to have to go back to the beginning
Mm-hmm.
and bring you up to date here. So we're happy to do it, and it does end up being satisfying for everyone, but those are the kinds of things that we see that would have been easier had you come to us from the beginning. Um, and even with a small estate, maybe it's not an enormous undertaking, but efficiency wise, it doesn't generally end well.
Yeah. Especially when you add in, I know one widow, he had probably 10 accounts at different firms, real estate, different states. I mean, that was an undertaking, and her and her children are trying to navigate it by themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And they'll call me every once in a while for a question. Like, you need somebody to just take it off your hands, spearhead it, tell you exactly what to do, when to do it, because they're trying to fit it in at night, on the weekends, in between play dates, all that type of stuff. And then to get all of them on the same page about things
Mm-hmm.
is just a nightmare. Like you said, especially having an advisor, a state attorney team,
Yes.
one can handle the accounts, the other one can handle the estate, and then you have an accountant if you need to for the taxes.
Mm-hmm.
You're involved so much less. You don't have to be as involved, or you know what's going on. You just don't have to do the tedious stuff. I think that's where people get lost.
Exactly.
Those
And
small
that's where
tasks.
we all sort of fall off a little bit. If you're working on a task, and then you have to get on a conference call, you drop it. Maybe a week later, you pick it up, things like that. Because we all have jobs and we all have other things going on. It does take a longer time rather than hiring someone from the beginning to quarterback it and take over all that minutia. And if you have the advisor and the attorney on the same page, it is, again, efficient. That is the most efficient way that you can really do your estate plan while you're alive and then have the estate administered after you pass. Absolutely.
And I think it's the greatest gift you can give your loved ones if you have a team in place, because then you can actually grieve
Mm-hmm.
and be there in the moment and not worrying about how these bills are going to get paid, selling the house, what to do with the accounts, taking things like required minimum distributions or filing for taxes. You
Mm-hmm.
can actually be there grieving, being with your loved ones instead of dealing with the financial mess or fighting with siblings or
Mm-hmm.
in-laws about it. And you can actually just be there to grieve, because what I've seen, I'm thinking of a widow, it comes to mind. She lost her husband very unexpectedly, going through the estate by herself, no attorney, no advisor, dealing with that. She came to me a few months later and she goes, I just need to get this done. I just need to get this resolved. A year later is when she actually grieved.
Oh, yeah.
That's when it actually hit her, because she was so busy doing those tedious stuff.
Mm-hmm.
She ended up grieving a year later, and it was very sad. It was very hard for her to move on with her life because she kind of put everything on pause, just trying to get everything done.
And it's overwhelming, between the emotional aspect of it and then having to do all these tasks, tax returns, things like that. It is overwhelming. And if you hire professionals or you have somebody in place, at least they can act as, if you would want some control over the process, you have at least someone guiding you through it. And like you said, it does. We have clients who have come to us and they're fighting with their siblings, and we're just really the buffer. So it's like, I'm not making these decisions. This is what dad put in his will. This is how the attorney says it has to go. We all have to listen to her. And it really does help with sibling relationships because it's a third party that is not interested in the assets of the estate. They're interested in having the will probated and the assets put in the trust under the will and things like that. So it really is a little bit, it helps everyone step back a little bit from their emotions because it is overwhelming to begin with to lose a loved one.
Yeah. Yeah, you can't call up your friend to get the money. You're calling you, like you said, a third party. Or
Right.
my grandmother set it up where the trust company was the executor of the will. They
Mm-hmm.
were the ones making sure everything was according to what my grandmother wanted. And
Exactly.
my uncle would call them up screaming and yelling at them because he was so upset over what happened with the estate. And my mom kept saying, thank goodness it wasn't me. Her grandmother wanted to put her down. She's like, thank goodness it wasn't me, because the trust company, guess what they would do? Click. They could
Right.
hang up on him if he got irrational, irate, angry.
Exactly. They're not going to see him at Christmas and
Exactly. It shifts it and it
Mhm.
makes it, okay, this is the business piece of it. Let's hand it to somebody who does that business
Exactly. Mhm.
type of thing. So, well, thank you, Lauren. I think the hardest part is just making it a priority.
Yes.
Making it a priority to talk about it with your spouse or with an advisor, an attorney, but priority with the money,
Mhm.
making sure the funds are there to make it happen, because it is an investment, but it's such an important piece, especially when your children are young, but even when your children are older, it helps protect your family. I don't know how else to say it. It helps protect your family. Why don't you want to protect your family?
And I always say to clients, I understand that this is, the money that it's going to cost, but it is going to save you so much money in the long run if you do it well the first time. And we all understand, especially now, taking on any extra costs, but it will absolutely make it easier for your family and it will save you your family money after you pass.
Yeah, and save them a lot of emotions, a lot of anxiety and
Absolutely.
stress. And like you said, do it right the first time, review it every few years, and then it's kind of on autopilot.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
especially, it's great if you, the attorney, reaches out to them. They don't even have to think about it. It's like, okay,
No.
they're going to check back in with me in a few years. Then we can revisit it then.
Exactly. And if there's nothing to do, there's nothing to do. That's okay too. But we just like to make sure that if something does happen, you're ready, your family's prepared, and we make it as easy for them in a really terrible situation as possible.
Exactly. That's a nice way to put it. And being proactive instead of reacting to things. And when you're reacting, it always is going to cost you more money
Exactly,
and
exactly.
more work, more stress and stuff. So
Mhm.
thank you, Lauren. We'll have Lauren's information because she's
Thank you.
offering a freebie too, which we are very grateful for that, Lauren.
Of course.
And I think everybody's thinking about this a lot more. So hopefully people take advantage of it, reach out, even if it's just to review what they currently have. It's well worth knowing that there's a second opinion on it, or if so, a law change, like you said.
Mhm.
So cheers, Lauren. Hopefully
Absolutely.
we'll be
Thank
out
you
of
for
this
having
soon.
me on. Yes,
We can do an in-person wine tasting soon.
that would be nice. Yes. It
But
was good to
cheers,
see you
everybody.
again.
Thank you for watching.